With week 10 in the books for a large majority of you, you only have 3 to 4 more weeks of the fantasy regular season before the playoffs start, and your trade deadlines are rapidly approaching. So let's take a look at a few players that I'm looking to sell now before your trade deadline. Starting first with a player that I promised you earlier in the year would be in this video, and here he is. Bears running back DeAndre Swift, who I had as a buy target a few weeks ago at the start of his breakout string of games, but I warned you in that video that if you bought DeAndre Swift then that he would be a sell before your deadline, and you can even check the film on that one. Now, I will let you know that we are going to have videos about players to buy and sell before your trade deadlines as you gear up for the fantasy playoffs, and I can just about guarantee you that DeAndre Swift will be a sell before your trade deadline. His December schedule is just absolutely brutal. The main reason why I want to sell DeAndre Swift is because he's a mediocre running back who took advantage of some seriously good matchups. Since week 5, Swift has not faced one single bad matchup and actually faced 4 bottom 10 defenses, including 2 bottom 3, and that's led to Swift being the RB12 in points per game over that stretch with 3 games over 19 PPR points. But now look at the defenses that he's about to face starting in week 12. The Vikings twice, the Lions twice, the Niners and the Seahawks. Minnesota and Detroit are both top 6 against running backs. They just shut everything down on the ground. The Niners and the Seahawks are below average against running backs, but they're intermixed between the horrible divisional matchups that you probably won't trust starting Swift in crunch time, even against okay matchups. It's a very similar schedule to the schedule that he had to start the year when he faced 2 top 12 defenses against running backs and 2 average defenses. He had 1 good game in that first 4 weeks and 3 absolute dud weeks when he couldn't even rush for over 30 yards or total over 45 yards with his receiving work included. People were literally asking if they should drop DeAndre Swift after week 3. That is how bad he was. So no, I do not want DeAndre Swift on my team to end the year. I don't want to go back to how he was to start the year. I don't want to have to sit him on my bench when he has value now based on his production the past month or so. So please sell DeAndre Swift today. Now, the next player that I want to sell is another running back in Najee Harris. It's a very similar story as Swift in that Najee is a fairly mediocre running back who also really isn't involved in the receiving game because that's Jalen Warren's job, and he's been coasting through some great matchups in an improved offense under Russell Wilson. But I think all of that is about to change, potentially starting this week against the Baltimore Ravens, but then really starting next week in week 12 when he gets the Browns twice, the Bengals, the Eagles, the Ravens again, and then the Chiefs in championship week. That is the most brutal schedule for all running backs to end the year, and he gets 2 matchups against the number 1 and number 2 ranked defenses in Philly and Kansas City during the fantasy playoffs. Listen, Najee has been doing really well over the past few weeks. He wrecked the Raiders for 100 yards and a touchdown. He wrecked the Jets for 100 yards and a touchdown. He wrecked the Giants for 100 yards and a touchdown, all right in a row, bam, bam, bam. Then they had a bye week. Then they come back to a road matchup against the Commanders that they do end up winning, but Najee only totaled 53 yards on 21 touches, didn't have any catches, and thank goodness he found the end zone. Otherwise, it would have been just a 5-point fantasy day. And I think that's the recipe for the remainder of the year. They have a bunch of matchups against either pretty good to really good opposing offenses that their defense can only do so much against. So if Pittsburgh winds up trailing more, Najee's going to get less work, and even when he does get the work, the defenses that he faces are really good, so he won't be efficient, and you're going to have to hope that he finds the end zone to even give you a double-digit day, or else he's going to lose you a week. I don't want that on my roster when I'm looking towards winning a championship, so Najee Harris is a must-sell right now. And the third running back on this list, I'm just basically going in order of running back rest of season schedule rankings, with Pittsburgh being the worst, Chicago being the second worst, and now the LA Chargers are the third worst, and I want to sell J.K. Dobbins. And as much as this is a schedule thing, there are a couple other factors at play for why I want to sell J.K. Dobbins right now. The first is that Gus Edwards is back, and you may not consider that a major issue, but I kind of do. Before getting hurt, Gus saw 12 touches and 18 touches in weeks 1 and 2, then only 3 touches in week 3 against Pittsburgh because they were losing and they needed to throw more. Then he gets hurt, and the first week back this weekend, he basically 50-50s the backfield with Dobbins and outproduces him on the ground. touchdowns. So Edwards is a moderate threat for touches to a running back that is also becoming very volume dependent right now. And what I mean by being volume dependent is that Dobbins isn't really a receiving threat. I mean, he's getting 2 to 4 receptions per game, which is nice in PPR leagues to just get a free couple extra points, but he's not doing anything with those receptions. This past week, he had 3 catches, very good, for 5 yards, not that good. And that's the story of like 80% of Dobbins' game logs as a receiver this year. On top of that, he's only rushed for over 60 yards twice since week 2. So he's not very efficient on the ground. He's extremely inefficient through the air, but he's scoring just enough touchdowns to make himself just relevant enough that he's a weekly RB2 starter. But I am not buying it anymore, especially when you look at his schedule. Starting this week, he gets matchups against Cincy, Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, then Tampa Bay, Denver, New England during the fantasy playoffs, which actually aren't horrible matchups, but you got to get to the playoffs with J.K. Dobbins on your team if you want to play him then. And with a horrendous schedule the next 4 weeks, you might not make the playoffs with J.K. Dobbins in your lineup. He's already played Kansas City, and he put up 9 PPR points in that game. Cincy and Baltimore are actually harder matchups for running backs than Pittsburgh is, and he only put up 8 points against Pittsburgh. He did put up 17 already on Denver, but without scoring, that's only 11 PPR fantasy points on 27 touches. Plus, Denver has drastically improved since then offensively to where that might be just a better game in general. Are you understanding why I want to sell J.K. Dobbins right now? I think people just really remember and hold on to his massive performances in week 1 and week 2 because he was great and he was a shiny new thing and a late round pick that people hit on early. So I think he carries name value with solid production value as the current RB15 overall. So out of the 3 running backs that I've highlighted already, Dobbins is the one that should probably net you the greatest return in a trade. So those are the 3 players I am vehemently opposed to rostering still by the end of this week or even next week at the absolute latest. They just all happen to be running backs. I did look at the wide receiver strength of schedules, but no one really stands out as like a must sell. Brian Thomas Jr. does have a rough schedule, might not even have Trevor Lawrence either, and we saw how bad Mac Jones was this past week, so if you can sell BTJ now, I really wouldn't mind doing that. The Vikings also have a really tough schedule, but I'd never recommend ever selling Justin Jefferson, but maybe Jordan Addison is a guy that you can add in a deal who carries some weight based on name recognition, and he might struggle as the 2nd or 3rd option on the team against really good defenses. Josh Downs also gets Denver and Tennessee during the fantasy playoffs, 2 of the hardest defenses for wide receivers in the entire league, so take note of that. And the other receiver that I just want to mention is the new hotness of Cedric Tillman. Cleveland's end of season schedule is really rough, and Tillman is the one guy that you can probably get a good piece back for or really use him to upgrade dramatically somewhere else on your roster. Starting in week 12, Tillman will probably see elite cornerback coverage against Joey Porter twice, Pat Surtain, Trent McDuffie, and Jalen Ramsey. Those are 5 of his last 6 cornerback matchups for fantasy football. As a guy that you got off of waivers 2 to 3 weeks ago, now might be the time to cash in on that and move him before his schedule really takes a turn for the worst. And I will also mention that a lot of this analysis is very much based on rest of season strength of schedule, which I use our hotspots tool on 4for4.com to quickly filter teams with the best or worst schedules for the rest of the year or just the fantasy playoffs specifically. You'll see that at wide receiver that players like Jamar Chase, Terry McLaurin, maybe Puka, and Cooper Kupp also have tougher end of season schedules. Not that you would want to really trade those guys immediately, but it is nice to know as you plan for the fantasy playoffs. You can do this with the other 3 positions as well to help you figure out where your own players fall with their strength of schedules, and you can get access to this tool plus our projections and weekly rankings using the promo code YouTube at checkout on any 4for4 subscription at a decreased price since we're already halfway through the year. And if you're interested in some of the players that I'm looking to buy before trade deadlines, then you can check out this video right up here.